Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries and relevant to you, the viewer. My name's Tony Carbone, personal injury lawyer, 30 years experience. With me today I've got Nunzio Tartaglia, partner in the law firm in insurance law. Good evening, Nunz.
Good evening, Tony. Viewers, welcome.
And Don Mafia, a partner in the transport accidents in a law firm. Good evening, Don.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening, viewers.
Viewers, tonight we've got a riveting episode with Helen Versey, legal member at the Mental Health Tribunal. She'll be with us in the second segment, so stay tuned for that.
Tony, before we kick off, what's in the news?
Oh, there's been a lot of stories in the news. Look, Don, this is right up your alley. Yeah. Legal fears threaten class trips. So, in effect, school teachers these days don't want to go on these class trips because they're worried about getting sued.
Well, that's right. Fear of their children or the students being injured and then subsequently being sued, which is ridiculous.
Well, there's a lot of hyperactive kids out there. I mean, Don's got one of them. Can you imagine? I mean, you've got to be extra vigilant, don't you?
Yeah, look, you do, but look, I think they're taking a little bit too far. Look, there's a quote from the Australian Education Union president who said, "We're living in an increasingly litigious society and schools bear the brunt of that litigiousness." I think they're taking that a little bit too literally, Tony. It's my opinion.
Is it probably staff numbers going on these trips, Don?
No, I think it's more staff training. The school should be right training as to how to deal with these things. I mean, there's a coroner's report out about going on a school camp, a child drowned, where the teachers were just not equipped to deal with those things. Or even the schools doing a safety assessment to make sure, okay, if we're going to take a bunch of kids, are they going to be safe in the environment that we're going to take them? So if you've got 30 kids, one teacher walking the streets, well, that's not safe. So you've got to ensure those things. I think it goes back to the school.
That's a very good point, isn't it? If you're going to take them to a camp, you might have snakes.
Yep.
You got water. Yeah. You know, you're going to have to warn them about, wandering off and getting bitten or falling into the lake.
That's it. Oh, look, I think Don summed it up. I think it's all about doing sort of risk assessments, just like it's just like a work site. So I just don't see how they're any different from any other sort of, occupied place. So I think that it's just a matter of being vigilant and taking care.
Yeah. I used to love our school trips. I went out to Emu Bottom when I was a kid. The only thing, I got bitten by this bull ant. It was this big. I'll tell you, I swelled up like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, let's keep moving. What's this about the hospital being slammed, Nons?
Yeah, the State Ombudsman has slammed the Bendigo Health for basically poor record keeping in regards to patient abuse in their psychiatric wards, which, look, in these type of cases, Tony, as you know, a lot of it really is dictated by what's documented. And so if they're not really keeping good records and good document keeping, it can cause trouble down the track.
Well, I think it's not only a case of psychiatric cases, it should be good record keeping in every case.
Well, I just wonder where it's on purpose with these poor record keeping. If there's over abuse and all these things. So look, I don't know, but look, the Ombudsman has made that has made the call and said, look, they slammed for it. It's not proper keeping. It's what do we do though?
Yeah, look, it's very hard to deal with some of these psychiatric
I think
patients,
that's
why.
I think that's where the poor record keeping may come from. I don't think it's probably what Don's mentioned. I think Don's taking it too far from my liking. But look, I think it's more that it's it's a difficult area of injury, and they're going through a lot of time, and how to document that can be difficult. So, but look, in terms of cases, Tony, you know that the notes are the most important in these psychiatric cases.
They're critical. They're absolutely critical. So, look, we'll probably come back to this or raise it with Helen in the second segment, I think. It's just a matter of time, they say, that before there's another tragedy. Many, many years ago, Don, there was a plane that slammed into a house near Essendon Airport, killed a family of 5 kids and the wife. The only survivor was the husband because he was working. Now, recently we had this incident where the plane crashed into the Chelsea home.
Yep.
Do you believe that Moorabbin Airport, something should happen there?
Well, I think it does. I mean, Moorabbin Airport is surrounded by residential. It's very close. I mean, in this case, he only just took off and he went straight to Chelsea. There's been a few incidences, a lot of planes, and they're not just, they're learner planes, Tony, too. So the risks are high. and you're going around there. I think it's just as the title of the article says, it's just a matter of time that this happens, time again. So something's got to give.
Well, if they're going to close Moorabbin, they should close down Essendon. I mean, I got planes flying over the top of my roof. A couple of times I thought they were going to slam into my roof.
Yeah, look, with Moorabbin it's difficult because you've got, I think the numbers are about 1,000 planes fly a training circuit every 14-hour period. So you're talking a massive amount of planes. And look, it could is just a matter of time, I suppose, when something does unfortunately happen.
I mean, aren't we being over the top here? It's only a matter of time before someone has an accident in a car. I mean, this is the chance of this happening so much smaller than someone having a car accident.
Oh, well, yeah, Tony, but then what are the solutions? You close down Moorabbin, you've got to open another airport.
Exactly.
And everywhere you go, with the increasing population of Melbourne and Victoria, anywhere, the rural countries are becoming inner city now. So it is, look, you have planes flying around residential buildings. There are dangers, risks involved. On the other hand, you're quite right, Tony. I mean, driving a car's a risk.
Yeah, but look, these are more of they're used for training purposes. So I think there's got to be a lot of education there to make sure that they are doing the right things.
Oh, we'll come back to this.
Yeah.
What about this tragic situation where we've had quite a few jockeys die in the last couple of months? I mean, there's been about 3 female jockeys in particular that have come off horses and crashed and sustained.
Two female riders died within 3 days, Tony.
Yep.
Tony, Lee Freeman says that all horses should be checked by the vets before racing. Is that going too far?
I don't reckon that's the answer because a lot of these horses that do break down, it just happens out of the blue.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution is just probably improve the vests that they wear, and a lot of it's just good luck and bad luck, really, when you think about it, because they're travelling at 60 k's an hour at the very least. If you fall and you get kicked in the head, Darren Gatchie got kicked in the head, survived. Darren Beedman's, got very nasty injuries. It stopped his career.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a jockey, you're going to come off a horse. It's a dangerous profession. That's what they choose. They're brilliant. They're professional. But I mean, it's just sad that when it happens in 2s and 3s.
Well, Tony, you mentioned a vest. How would a vest prevent like a neck injury or something of that sort?
Well, a lot of them die from head injuries. That's a sad thing. I mean, they've got the helmets, but I don't know how much can you wear. Sometimes the really heavy stuff causes damage, doesn't it? Snaps your neck.
I think what's important for these jockeys is that they have good insurance policies in terms of income protection, trauma cover, and all that.
Well, it's been getting better.
Yeah, because look, I said, they can just like that. They can have a nasty injury. So.
Well, they're picked up by work cover now, Dom, which is probably the only sport that is covered by work cover. Footballers aren't covered.
So it's a dangerous sport. So you're quite right, making sure you have the right insurance coverage and all those things are in line.
Do you want to quickly do this cage fighting? I mean, I know that.
Yeah, just quickly, Tony. Chief Commissioner Ken Lay, he's dead against UFC fighting, which is basically cage fighting coming to Australia, and it's in contradiction to Labor's policy. And if they do win the election, it could be an issue.
Don, what do you think?
I think it's silly. Why is it legal to do cage fighting and legal to do boxing? I mean, what's the difference? The concern is they would take it out in the streets, but people get one punch hit and all that thing from boxing on the streets causing horrific injuries. There's no difference. So you're going to ban one, ban the other. Simple as that.
Don, Nunz, thanks for this segment. We're going to go to sponsors break. Stay tuned. After the break, we've got Helen Versey. Viewers, welcome back to the show. As I said earlier, we've got Helen Versey. She's a legal member with the Mental Health Tribunal. Welcome aboard, Helen.
Thank you.
Helen, with the Mental Health Tribunal, what essentially is it there for?
The Mental Health Tribunal, which I should say is fairly recently created under the new Mental Health Act 2014, essentially it's there to decide whether people should be made the subject of a treatment order, a compulsory treatment order. So in other words, if someone who appears to be mentally ill is taken into a hospital and a psychiatrist assesses that they need to be retained as an inpatient and they're not prepared to stay voluntarily, the hospital or the the psychiatrist can make a temporary treatment order, and then within 28 days the person has to be brought before the Mental Health Tribunal, and the tribunal decides whether they should be made the subject of a treatment order. They must make a treatment order if they're satisfied that they meet certain criteria under the Act. If they don't meet any one of those criteria, and there's 4 criteria, then the tribunal doesn't make a treatment order.
Helen, you've got some stats there on this electroconvulsive treatment. A lot of it's medication, isn't it?
Most of the treatment is medication and also therapeutic treatment.
What's therapeutic treatment?
Well, you might have people involved in discussion groups, having sort of psychotherapy, sort of assisting people to manage their lives and manage their mental illness, not necessarily through drugs.
Just quickly, Tony, Helen, so with respect to making a treatment order, so after a temporary treatment order's been made, the criteria you're referring to, what is it that the tribunal will be looking at?
Okay, well, the tribunal has to, first of all, be satisfied that the patient has a mental illness, and mental illness is defined under the Act, and it's fairly strictly defined.
Yeah.
So it's defined as being a medical condition that's characterised by a significant disturbance of thought, mood, perception or memory. And the Act very specifically excludes certain things, so that it excludes from having a mental illness, having particular political, religious beliefs, engaging in illegal or antisocial behaviour. It excludes someone who's intellectually disabled or uses drugs and consumes alcohol.
I'm not looking at say this to you. If the medication doesn't work, guess what they do next? They zap your brain. It's called electroconvulsive treatment.
I think that's actually a simplification, Tony.
All right, well, explain to us what that means.
ECT tends to be used in the most extreme cases where medication is not working and a person, it's really used very much these days as a last resort. So, for example, you might have a case where someone is extremely suicidal, like they're really, they're attempting suicide even in hospital. The drugs, they're resistant to the drugs, the antipsychotic drugs or the antidepressive drugs. It has been found that ECT is a fairly quick and effective way of getting a person stable so that they're no longer suicidal.
Helen, if the tribunal does make a treatment order, look, I've got a 2-part question. One, do you consult the patient's family? How far does that go? And secondly, if a treatment order is made, does the tribunal make any recommendations as to what type of treatment they should receive?
Not in relation to treatment. So in answer to your last question, no, the tribunal doesn't make recommendations in relation to the type of treatment you receive. The tribunal holds a hearing so we can have members of the family present if the patient consents to that.
Psychiatrist.
There's usually members of the treating team because they have to present the case and convince the tribunal that the person has a mental illness and meets the other criteria in the Act, and that there's no less restrictive way of treating them. In other words, that they can't be treated voluntarily. The patient is there, if possible, and will be heard. So the tribunal holds a proper hearing. I mean, we don't take evidence on oath. We can do, but we don't normally, and it's fairly informal. It involves everyone who's involved in the care of the patient where possible. And in fact, the whole idea under the new Act is that it's conducted in a way that includes the patient and the patient is involved in the decision-making process.
Viewers, we're going on a sponsor break. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll be back with Helen and Nunz to discuss some very interesting cases. Jules, welcome back to the show. We're with Helen Versey and Nunzio Tartaglia. Nunzio, you wanted to ask Helen something?
Yeah, Helen, so you mentioned the first set of criteria that needs to be fulfilled for a treatment order. What are the remaining three, if you could briefly summarise?
I will. So, as I've said, the tribunal has to be satisfied the person has a mental illness, as defined under the Act, that because the person has the mental illness, they need immediate treatment to prevent serious deterioration in mental or physical health or serious harm to self or others. And I emphasise the word serious because under the new Act, as opposed to the old Act, it has to be serious rather than just harm. And that the immediate treatment will be provided under the order, and that there's no less restrictive means reasonably available for the person to receive the treatment. Now, what that essentially means is that they can't receive the treatment voluntarily. Yeah. I should add that the tribunal doesn't have to consider whether the person can give informed consent or not. The Act doesn't actually require that.
Well, it's an inquisitorial system, you just get out there and just ask all the questions and make an informed decision based on everything before you, correct, Helen?
Well, yes. I mean, when you say inquisitorial system, that is true, but it's very much more an informal, in a way, discussion.
Collaborative.
Yeah. It's a collaborative hearing, yeah. Which is intended to make the patient the focus of the hearing, and really, yes, just getting as much information as possible and involving all those who are involved in the patient's care, including the family.
Now, on that note, Helen, I'm going to go to the first case, which is of interest. Stewart and Kirkland-Veenstra. Give us the facts as brief as you can, Nunz.
Yeah, well, Tony, and this is one that Helen disagrees with you and I in our position, this one, so we'll have a good chat about it. But effectively, two police officers came upon the deceased, in this case, with an individual, sitting in his vehicle with a vacuum hose running from his exhaust pipe into his window. They had a chat with him and came to the conclusion that, look, he should be okay, despite the fact that clearly he was almost trying to commit suicide, and offered either to take him home or call his partner to pick him up. Anyway, that all got done, and then I think about a day later he committed suicide via carbon monoxide poisoning, and his partner issued proceedings, Tony, for nervous shock. And look, ultimately the High Court found that there was no duty against these police officers. That was, in summary. And what do you think, Tony? I totally disagree.
I think it's outrageous. Helen, I'll come to you first. I mean, two police officers see a man in a car with a hose, obviously connected to his exhaust. He's not exactly having a milkshake or anything like that. I mean, monoxide poisoning coming into the car. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I thought that extraordinary.
Well, that wasn't quite the case.
Oh, it was very close.
They made... you see, you have to understand, first of all, that... and this was under the old Victorian Mental Health Act 1986, but the police can only take a person into custody and to a mental health facility under certain circumstances. Now... if you read the case, the police officers actually talked to this person at length. He told them that he'd been sitting there for a couple of hours, and he agreed that he had been contemplating that things were going wrong with his life, but that he'd had a think about it, and he decided that he would go home and talk to his wife about things. They'd checked the car, the engine hadn't been running, and he was, as the summary says, he was coherent, he was able to discuss it with them, and they were satisfied that while he may have been contemplating suicide, he'd actually changed his mind. And as I say, the police couldn't take him into custody unless they had formed the belief that he appeared to be mentally ill and that other criteria applied.
It was a value judgment.
Well, but
yes.
You see, they would have actually been breaking the law if they'd taken him into custody if he didn't meet the criteria under that.
That Section 10 of the Act gave him a discretionary power to apprehend a person who they thought appeared to be mentally ill or was recently attempted suicide. Now, I would have thought the precaution or the better decision was to use that power, because they're police officers, they're not psychologists or psychiatrists. They can't make decisions to his mental health. So why should they just say, well, you go home and I think you should be fine? I disagree with you in that regard.
Well, I actually think that they made extensive inquiries of him, and they were satisfied that they hadn't got sufficient grounds to exercise their power to take him to a mental health facility. And he'd given a perfectly rational explanation. And in fact, he did go home, as he said he would. And from memory, I think his wife saw him and they had a discussion, and it was only later that he actually committed suicide. So I think, you see, you have to understand that just, in order to exercise their powers, they have to form some belief that he's suffering from a mental illness. It's a very serious thing to force someone, to take someone into police custody who's done nothing wrong.
But wouldn't you have been assessed by a psychiatrist at that stage, Helen?
Well, he would have been assessed.
If they applied Section 10...
He would have been assessed.
Yeah.
But he'd done nothing
Could have saved his life.
Well, if he was rational and he wasn't mentally ill, well, maybe he didn't actually want his life to be saved.
What doesn't make sense is the High Court eventually found that there's effectively no common law duty to rescue another. But the fact of the matter is that if he clearly needed rescuing in this case, and the very few people have a hose connected to their exhaust pipe, and that to me sparks science.
No, he clearly had been contemplating suicide, and he didn't deny that to the police officers. But what he said was that he had been contemplating it, but that he'd sat there for 2 hours and that he was then going to go home, and that is exactly, in fact, what he did.
Well, the family lost in the county court. They won in the Court of Appeal and lost in the High Court.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's quickly do another case. Hunter, area service in Preston. Nunz, quickly, what's this one about?
Well, Mr. President was taken to hospital following an extremely violent and bizarre behaviour, transferred to a psychiatric institution for assessment, later released about 11 a.m. the next day, and then killed his brother's fiancée about 6 hours later, Tony. And he subsequently brought proceedings against basically against the hospital for letting him go.
This one was quite interesting. In that, I think the circumstances of the very bizarre and violent behaviour that triggered him being brought into hospital, I was surprised, but you never know all the facts, and you're not there at the time. But it did seem strange that they had released him. But again, because all mental health legislation, and this of course was under a different Mental Health Act than the Victorian one that I'm familiar with, but all contemporary mental health legislation works on the basis that you use the least restrictive treatment. Now, again, in this case, there was evidence the brother had come to the hospital and appeared he was sort of willing to take his brother home. And the hospital, because of their obligations to deal with someone in the least restrictive way, and if possible, and certainly that's the case under the Victorian Act, the emphasis is that it should be voluntary unless. Now, again, it's very difficult. I think one of the difficulties in holding, saying that hospitals have been negligent when they're having to make a judgment call based on how a person is presenting at that point in time. And you take into account, things like the circumstances, their family circumstances, whether they've got support, if they're being treated voluntarily outside the hospital. I think one of the problems is that if you start holding that hospitals are negligent, because it's so hard to predict what's going to happen. And the reality is that very few mentally ill people are actually violent or homicidal. Very few, if you look at the statistics. So if you're making a judgment call, if you've got a brother there who's willing to take the person home, well, maybe it wasn't such a a wrong decision as might appear on the paper.
Helen, this is a very hot topic and very, very topical, and obviously we're going to agree to disagree on quite a few things. We're going to have to get you back on another episode because sadly time's flown, viewers. I want to thank Helen Versey for coming on board. Nunz, thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Terry.
Viewers, go to our social media, in particular the website and Facebook and Twitter. Stay tuned for future episodes and always remember to stay safe.